Amen. Thank you, Joe. Can't help but make a couple of comments on, we talked about, we prayed for um, Estelle and Alison as they're going to Mumbai. You're going to the best city, one of the best cities in the world, most crazy city, massive city. Estelle, if you have a problem with personal space, where are you? Forget it. You will not get personal space, or you might in the nights where you're staying, but personal space doesn't exist in Mumbai. Leopards, just a wee bit of advice about the leopards. They're in the national park. You probably won't be going in there. I used to run there. I used to actually early morning go for a run in the national park. And this was my theory. Just don't be the slowest. That was the theory. So as long, you don't have to be the fastest, but just don't be the slowest. And I managed to get away with that. Although at some points it was, challenging. Good. It's good to be with you this morning. It's good to have the opportunity to share with you and to take up this third subject of generously serving. We've been looking at, first of all, we had God-centered a couple of weeks ago. John shared with us, then Growing Together. Craig had shared with us. So we're on to generously serving. And the passage that I've chosen to base some thoughts on this morning is from Philippians chapter 2 and verses 1 to 11. So let me read that first, and then let's see what that might be saying to us on this subject. And in the NIV, it's titled, Having the Attitude of Christ. What a great heading, Having the Attitude of Christ. So good starting point, isn't it? We think about generously serving, it's about having the attitude of Christ. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God, died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor, gave him the name that is above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. This week, as I've been thinking about this topic, there have been three things on my mind. First of all, I've been just thinking again about God and his incredible love for us, which is in that passage, and I'll come and explore that a little bit more in a minute. But my mind has also been drawn to the horrific stories and pictures that we've been seeing on our television screens this week with the refugee crisis. Well, it's not just this week, it's over the last few weeks, isn't it? And I guess most of us have been incredibly challenged and horrified and, got all sorts of feelings about how do we respond to such a challenge. And I think it's impossible to separate that topic out from a topic such as generously serving. How do we respond to a global challenge like that? And I've got some thoughts on that. Then, as some of you know, we had our oldest daughter, Bethany, left for university yesterday. And Charmaine and I were busily making sure that she was ready and to some degree trying to generously serve Bethany. And that was on my mind. But I thought, you know what, if I start talking about Bethany, it'll get back to her and I'll be killed later on. So let me not use any examples from Bethany this morning. And certainly I realize there are many people in this here who are much more experienced than me, who have seen several people disappear off to university and have had a lot more experience. So we're there to learn from you. But there is, on the other two topics, I think there are things that hopefully we can learn from and talk about this morning. Let's start with the passage. And I wonder whether we could, Michael, have that up from maybe around verse 5 onwards. I'm going to jump back to the first few verses, the early verses in a minute. But I want to get Yes, that's brilliant. Thank you. I think this is a good opportunity, especially maybe for those of us who have been Christians for a long time, um, just to remind ourselves and to be reminded of just some fantastic truths that are there in the Bible, some amazing Christian truths that hopefully our faith is based on. That Christ, as part of the Trinity, as Christ who is in the nature of God, he is the one who spoke this world into existence, the one who created all the incredible stuff that we see around us, the one who sustains everything around us. That Christ chose not to hold on to that, not to see that as something that he should cling on to. Instead, he gave that up and he humbled himself to being born as a man, being born as a slave. So we've got this picture. If we want a model, an image of what it means to generously serve, here's the model I give to you. Christ, the one who spoke everything into existence, the one who was there at the beginning as the part of the Godhead, who has always been. He spoke it all. He's there. And he gave that up. He humbled himself, becoming obedient to God. He appeared in human form. Not only that, he was willing to go and die for us on a cross, to die a horrific death, a death which symbolized his willingness to be separated from God on our behalf. Death is this symbolism of separation from God, and Christ became obedient to death in order to overcome death. And only after he had done that, in the worst form of death at that, death on a cross, only after he had done that did God restore him to his rightful place. As he won that victory over death, he was restored for his rightful place in heaven, and one day all of creation will bow their knee before him. Here is our model. Here is a model of what it means to serve generously. The one who rightfully had everything, being willing to give up everything on our behalf, so that we could be restored into that right relationship with God. This was God taking the initiative. And as we try and get hold of this topic, what does it mean to generously serve? I want us to get hold of this incredible fact that God chose to generously serve us by letting his son die on the cross for us. This was God taking the initiative for us. While we were yet sinners, the Bible says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't demand that we came to a particular place, that we had a particular set of characteristics, that we, appeared in a particular way. He died for us that while we were yet sinners, he demanded nothing of us. He took the initiative. That was his model of service. He wanted us to be back in a right relationship with him. So at the heart of our desire to serve others, let's get hold of this selflessness, of this sacrificial God who came to serve us. And I just felt like saying this morning, if you've never really understood the amazing truth of that, the amazing truth of a God who loved us so much that he was willing to die for us, he was willing to send his only son to die for us. If you've never really entered in, if never really understood that, if you want to know more about that, if you would want to get on to a journey of faith, there is prayer ministry at the end. Last week it was a big queue to get into it, but there will be prayer ministry at the end. There are other people here, John or myself or others in the leadership, would be most happy to talk to you. If you've never really entered into that and never really chosen to follow a God who chose to serve us, then I would always want to encourage you to do that. Here is our model, the model of Jesus Christ, who died for us, gave up everything for us on the cross. But there's some interesting stuff in this passage. Could we jump back to about the first part, verse 2 or 3? And there's some really interesting stuff there, because Paul, in this letter to the Philippians, says this. He says, make my joy complete. Whose joy? Paul's joy, but Christ's joy is one, the one who died for us. Make his joy complete by being like-minded, by having the mind of Christ. And here he comes up with some really challenging stuff. And I sort of want to highlight this, and I'm going to come back to it, but here's some really good bullet points in terms of getting hold of this topic of generously serving. Do nothing out of selfish ambition, first point. Second point, rather, in humility, value each other above yourselves. Third point, don't look to your own interests, but rather to the interests of others. So 3 amazing points. They don't need expanded. They don't need explained. They're just there in Scripture. Do nothing out of selfish ambition. In humility, value others above yourselves, and don't look out for your own interests, but look out for the interests of others. I want this to be practical, and we need to explore what does that mean for us here now in Bearsden and Mulgai. What does it mean to get hold of this? And we'll come back to that in a minute. Let me talk a wee bit for a minute about the refugee crisis, because I think there's some stuff that's come out of that which has challenged me, some useful illustrations possibly, some things that have been said, some which have horrified me. And I may be controversial here, but it's okay to be controversial. Some which have horrified me, and some which I thought, that's just brilliant. That's just amazing. Some of the images that we've seen of the last few weeks, that truck, that lorry in Austria where they found 71 bodies. Horrific. The little boy, just 3 years old, found face down on the beach in Greece. A horrendous image, but the image is also of his hometown and how that's just been destroyed in Syria, and maybe just helping us understand what people are running away from, and the reality that there is just a horrendous reality for people out there, and they're living tragic and awful circumstances. Or the railway station in Hungary, and a sign of a country just not knowing what to do, not knowing how to respond, feeling probably helpless and powerless, and just feeling the pain maybe of that nation, wondering how they were meant to respond to this crisis. Or more stories about boats capsizing off Libya, more people drowning. Horrendous challenges. And some terrible responses over the last few weeks as well. Here's something that a particular politician said. I maybe won't name him. He said, in regard to the debate over migration with some of the governments, he responded with some of the government's strongest language yet. He said this, claiming millions of marauding African migrants pose a threat to the European Union's standard of living and social structure. This is what this politician, he said. The millions of marauding migrants pose a threat to the European Union's standard of living and social structure. I want to say to that particular politician, I want to say to you, I profoundly disagree with you, because surely this is the very point, if we are to generously serve, that we have to count the cost. And it is not about preserving a standard of living or necessarily even a social structure. It is about counting the cost. It is about being willing to take a hit. And I believe that actually there are many in this country who have stood up in recent months, in recent days and weeks and months, and said, no, we're willing to take a hit. We would be willing to count a cost. And that's what it means to serve generously. It does cost. My mind was drawn back to when Charmaine and I used to live in India. In fact, this was just, well, I'd already met Charmaine, but we were not married. And I, in potentially a little bit of naivety, but with a strong sense of wanting to serve, invited a street boy, a boy that lived on the streets, to come and help me in my home. And he was willing to come and for a remuneration to come and do some of the washing up and clean the house and do a few odd jobs around the house. And I thought, what a great idea. That would be, I was encouraged to take this boy. You know the story, don't you, Charmaine? His name was Taju. And Taju came, worked in the house for maybe a week or two. And then we noticed some money had gone missing from the house, myself and my flatmates at that time. And confronted the guy, and we realized that actually while he was in the house cleaning, and he'd taken the opportunity to nick some of our money. So we thought, what do we do now? So we spoke to him, addressed the issue, confronted it, and invited him back to work again. You know, with clearer boundaries. We wanted to be clear about stuff being locked away. And a few weeks later, other things went missing. And it just reminded me that, you know, it was the right thing to do, had costs associated with it. And I want to say to that, you know, politician who says, I want to preserve our standard of living and our social infrastructure. No. If we're going to serve generously, it's not about protecting ourselves. It's not about putting boundaries around. It's simply about serving generously and counting a cost. And we've got to be willing to do that. Another thing I read this week, and this was just a few weeks ago. Slovakia says it will only accept Christians when it takes in Syrian refugees. Slovakia, we will only take Christians when we take in refugees. And again, my heart wants to cry out, no, Slovakia, no, please don't do that. You can't, you mustn't. Because surely a biblical model, if you see yourself as a Christian country wanting to serve in a Christian way, surely a biblical model given to us by Christ is that it's not with conditions. Christ died for us while we were yet sinners. And believe to serve generously means not to set preconditions, not to say we'll only take this group or we'll only take that group, we'll only do it in this way. It means to just serve generously in the mind of as Christ served us. Something positive as well. Let's not always look at the negative stuff, positive stuff. In the last few days, there was a picture of a little girl. In fact, I didn't see the picture. There may have been a picture, but a story of a little girl in Germany waiting at the railway station, waiting with some toys to hand them over to a Syrian family as they finally arrived at that railway station in Germany. And just waiting to give because she understood. And given to her by, and I'm sure that understanding had been given, encouraged to her by her family. She had understood something of the joy of giving to those that had nothing. And there is immense joy in giving. I saw another image of one of the workers at that railway station who'd had a mask on his face for some reason and pulling the mask away in order to kiss one of the refugee children that had come in. And it just reminded me that there is immense joy in serving those that have little. But here's the challenge, isn't this? It's not easy actually, it's never easy to think about these things. But somehow these things are far away from us, and we may respond in certain ways. We might respond by giving to charities or by writing letters, by advocating. There are ways which we might respond to that. But I think one of the challenges that we have is trying to understand how do we respond here and now in Bearsden. What does it mean for us? And I want to come back to some of those points. And Mike, could you get that PowerPoint slide up for me? That would be brilliant if you could have done that. Oh, that's really small. My apologies. I will make sure that I read that. It's got a nice topic, nice heading at the top. So here's some pointers. Here's some what I think is almost could be seen as a framework or some ideas as we think about us here and now. And to be reminded that we should do nothing out of selfish ambition. I just bring that to you because I think it's so easy to be looking at what is the best just for us. If we are to generously serve, it means not doing things out of selfish ambition. And a reminder again of the second point there in the early part of Philippians chapter 2. In humility, value each other above yourselves. In humility, value each other. Value other people above yourselves. Put the needs of others first. Looking out, and the third point there, looking not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Looking out for the interests of others. These are challenging things, aren't they? They're easy to say. In fact, they're too easy to say. I realize just standing up here, it's just so easy to say these things, but they're profoundly challenging, actually. If we are if we're about serving generously, looking out for the interests of others, not our own interests, not even the interests of Bearsden Baptist Church. What are the interests of this community so that we serve this community generously? It's not all about us. It's really challenging. I want to suggest that there are some things that we need to do. I really wish I'd put that up in bigger. I'm sorry. Never mind. I feel we need to feel the pain of those we seek to serve. We need to be willing to feel the pain. I don't know how we do that always, but we need to recognize that there are people within the community we're in who suffer, who struggle, who are vulnerable. And we need to somehow feel their pain and recognize that life is not good for everybody. So a willingness to feel pain, a willingness to count the cost. This will upset us. This will get in the way of our routines. This will frustrate us. We will feel let down. It won't always be a success. But there is a cost involved if we're going to serve generously, and we need to be willing to count that cost. I don't think that we should be setting loads of preconditions. You may want to argue with me over some of these points. I will be happy to be argued with at the end of the service. That's fine. But I don't think we should set a bunch of preconditions about how we serve generously. I don't think it makes sense. I think we need to look for ways of serving generously, not with preconditions. But I want to say that there is, and that wee last word there, which you can't read, is joy. I want to say to you, there is amazing joy in serving generously. And God brings joy to our hearts as we spend ourselves. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is a verse in Isaiah 58 where it talks about spending yourself on behalf of those that have nothing. And God calls us, as we look to serve, He calls us to spend of ourselves. And we will renew our strength and soar on wings like eagles. You know, that's the picture that God gives us. And God will give us joy as He does that, as we do that. God will give us joy as we do that. And I want to say that there are encouragements here. We have set up a community fund as a church to do just this, to give out to the community without precondition, to seek to bless others. We've already done that. We have people within the church here who go out and serve generously. That might be down at Glasgow City Mission. It might be as a street pastor. It might be in John and others go into the prison in multiple ways. Lots of people here serve generously in multiple ways within maybe your own work settings or for organizations, all sorts of ways. And you should be encouraged, and I hope you are encouraged by the ways that you have chosen to do that. And I hope that you will look for more opportunity, but I hope that you are just encouraged by that. I certainly want to encourage you. But I sort of felt that God is telling us that we need to push out the boundaries more. We need to look for more opportunities to serve generously. So here's a thought. We've got a few minutes. In your groups, because we're sitting like this, I thought I would take advantage of us sitting as groups like this. So in your groups, you've got some blank pieces of paper on your table. You should have something to write with. And we would, as a church, as a leadership of the church, we would just love to have your ideas. There's all sorts of ideas coming our way over this last few days. But we would love to have your ideas. Who do you feel God is calling us to serve? That's the simple question I chuck out to you. Who do you feel that God is calling us to serve? It could be about here and now within this community. If you feel we should be hiring a truck and driving to Cali or Budapest, you can write that down as well. I don't know, because I want to hear from you. I believe God is calling us. I believe this vision that we are keep putting before you about being God-centered, about growing together, and about generously serving is something that God has given us. So here's a question for us, right here, right now. What does that mean? I'll give you 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. Thank you. There we go. I'm on now. Right, we'll call out. We'll draw that to conclusion. Somebody will collect those pieces of paper from your tables at the end. If you're still scribbling, that's fine. Um, here's a thought to end with. I listen to the radio quite a lot on the way to work, and this is something I heard, which I found really interesting and quite challenging. And one of the, I don't know who said this, in fact, I can't remember who said it, and it doesn't really matter, but they said this. They said, doing nothing is equally a strategy, but it bears its own consequences. Quite an interesting, profound thought. Doing nothing is equally a strategy. It was in the context, well, maybe we just do nothing, But they're saying doing nothing is equally a strategy, but a strategy that bears its own consequences. We are not doing nothing, actually. We're doing quite a lot, and we should be encouraged by that. But we can do more, and I believe God is calling us to push the boundaries out. Let me pray. And then I'll invite Jamie and the band up to lead us in a song, and then we'll move in to sharing communion together.